welcome back to my channel. So today's a very different video because number one, I am in London right now, and number two, I am joined here with Eleanor Neale. Today we are collabing on a video together.
Finally.
Very exciting,
this has taken so long.
Today we're talking about Jack the Ripper, which is like a huge case. So obviously-
This is the London case.
Yeah. We figured like if we're in London, we have to do it. And we were actually going to have a background of London for this, but the lighting didn't work. And we actually started this pretty late in the day, so it could get dark during this, but
London weather says no filming.
yeah, I imagine it's really hard to go off natural lighting in London. Yeah, we're going to do this in two parts. So we're going to be talking about kind of the Jack the Ripper case overall and the different victims and stuff in my video, and then we'll finish it on Eleanor's channel, which will be linked below. Make sure to subscribe, and we'll be talking about kind of the different theories people have come up with, because there's quite a few.
Suspects, there are 12 suspects and theories that we're going to talk about. This is so speculated about. There's so many different theories, people that it could be.
I mean, it's definitely the most notorious case here, would you say?
Yeah.
I mean, if not like all over the world, like the biggest, most well-known serial killer. Our story takes place in Whitechapel, London in the 1800s, around actually 1888. And this time in London was actually pretty dangerous. Like, London was very dicey at the time.
A lot of violence, a lot of crime, a lot of poverty, a lot of people not being able to make ends meet, especially the women. And because of that, a lot of women resorted to prostitution, sex working, because at the time, this was in 1888, so there weren't many opportunities available to women at all. And that was just one of the things that women had to do in those times to be able to make a way for themselves.
So it's kind of like, what else are you gonna do if you want to survive? It came down to that for a lot of people. Like something like 1 in 5 women at the time were at least considering it. So a lot of women at least like did that at some point. Like maybe they were married at one point and then their husband died, because that would happen a lot back then. People's husbands were like dropping dead left and right. So people would be like kind of screwed, and a lot of women would have nothing and they would have to turn to prostitution. So the Jack the Ripper preyed on a lot of these women, unfortunately.
So the reason that this case is probably the most popular is that it's still unsolved. And it was such a big thing at the time. Everyone was so interested in it, trying to figure out who this was, why they were doing it, and why they were focusing on women so much. And this was one of the first cases, especially in England, that reached kind of like other countries. And
but yes, totally. I mean, this was kind of like the OJ Simpson of the time or something like that. Like, it was really one of the first cases to have people like following it. Like, have you heard the latest on Jack the Ripper? And people were following the investigation and putting pressure on the police to solve it. So that was something that was really different about this case, because a lot of the times a lot of cases were unreported, a lot of murders were unreported, but this one was really, really publicized and almost made a thing. And like you said, London's really like capitalized off of it, even to this day. Like, there are museums, and we went to one
so many
today.
Like museums, Jack the Ripper experiences. I believe London Dungeon is mostly based on Jack the Ripper.
Yes. Someone was telling me to go to those dungeons. Have you ever been there?
No, but it looks so good. We should have done that.
I know, what's wrong with us? All right, so we're going to be talking about each of the women that Jack the Ripper killed, but there are quite a few that people think Jack the Ripper may have killed, but there's only about 5 that are really, really connected to him, called the canonical 5. I hope I'm saying that right. And why? You were just explaining to me why they say that.
I believe the word canonical comes from like canon meaning like confirmed. I don't know, don't quote me on that.
The ones that are definitely connected to him. It definitely, it means something like that. I remember reading that at some point.
The canonical 5 are definitely Jack the Ripper victims, but there's as many as like 12 people that he could have killed.
Yeah, but we were reading them at the museum, and we both kind of think the chances of him having killed all of those people are sort of slim. So we're only really going to be focusing on the canonical 5 today. So Jack the Ripper's first victim was Mary Ann Nichols, and she also went by Polly. And Polly was born on August 26th of 1845 on Dean Street, Soho in London. Polly ended up living in Whitechapel. On August 31st of 1888, Polly was seen walking the Whitechapel Road a little after midnight. She was seen leaving a pub. So she had tried to rent a bed for that night, but she was actually turned down, and she was gonna go out and literally earn money, you know, have somewhere to stay that night by prostituting that night, which that's what a lot of women were doing. Like, they literally had nothing, and they're like, I will have nowhere to sleep tonight unless I do this. So that's what she was was doing.
So the last time Polly was seen alive was around 2:30 a.m. that day by her roommate, Emily Holland. Polly had told Emily that she had actually made up the money for this bed and she could have bought it 3 times over, but instead she actually spent that money on alcohol.
Yeah, which a lot of people were doing back then. Crazy. I mean, that just shows you how depressing it was in this time. I can't even imagine, like, why even...
The fact that people were more willing to spend money on alcohol than a bed to sleep in.
Yeah, that's pretty mind-blowing.
So around an hour later, after she was last seen at around 3:40 a.m, a man named Charles Cross was walking down Bucks Row in Whitechapel when he came across her body. And soon after Charles came across the body, another man named Robert Paul approached it, and the two of them went and got the police together.
Now, Polly, like most of the Ripper victims, was in horrible condition when she was found. So she had cuts on her throat, and she was also found disemboweled, literally had her like organs removed from her body. So it was a pretty gruesome crime scene, especially for the time. Like, people weren't used to just coming across something like that on the street.
It was clear that it wasn't just violence. This was someone that wanted to pull apart another human being's body.
Yeah, it's not just like a robbery where it's like kill and run. Yeah, it's something more. So what's really interesting is by the time the police got there, they think that she was only dead for about 30 minutes, which means that the killer was somewhere around the area still at that point. And she was found about 150 yards from the London hospital. Polly was buried on September 6th, and she was buried at the City of London Cemetery in a public grave. And in late 1996, the cemetery authorities decided to mark her grave with a public plaque. And that is what you're looking at now. Okay, so our second victim is Annie Chapman. And she was actually born as Eliza Ann Smith in 1841 in London. And on May 1st of 1869, Annie married her relative from her mom's side, a man named John Chapman. So,
oh my god.
Just some nice incest in there for you.
But that really shows like what time it was.
Oh yeah.
1869.
Shit was wild back then.
That would never go now.
No, definitely not. Like, oh yeah, I just, I met her on my mom's side of the family. Yeah. So her daughter Emily died of meningitis when she was only 12. And back then, again, it was so common to lose kids. It was like crazy. Like, people would have a ton of kids because normally a few of them would die. But this actually really hit them, like, really emotionally, so much so that they broke up and they were both just turned to drinking completely and went their separate ways and basically just became sad drunks.
And that was when Annie moved to Whitechapel, which is where all of this went down.
Yes.
So after her and her husband separated, he had to pay her 10 shillings a week. Now, in 1886, these payments stopped very suddenly, and it was actually because her husband passed away. And so now Annie had no form of income, and that was when she turned to prostitution.
Yeah, which was like so common back then. I mean, people's husbands died often, and people were dying from alcohol-related things a lot. People drank like fish back then. It was crazy. So
I've never heard that said
really
before.
Drank like a fish?
So when her income stopped and she turned to prostitution, she began staying at like beds that you could buy for the night. She didn't have her own place. And on September 8th, 1888, at 1:45 a.m, she went out looking for money for a bed because she didn't have any on her. She was going to go and get a job, get a client, and then return back to the beds and get a bed for the night.
Can you imagine living like that? How insane that would be? Like,
not having a certain place to stay every night.
And then having to do that to earn it? Like, oh my gosh, that's some serious desperation. So there was one witness named Miss Elizabeth Long, and she had testified that she had seen Annie talking to a man at about 5:30 a.m. on 29 Hanbury Street. Elizabeth described this man as over 40, a little taller than Annie, with dark hair, and he was wearing a deer stalker-like hat, which I never knew those were called deer stalker hats.
That's the first time I've ever heard that.
Deer stalker? It's like, is that like a weird hunting hat?
Her body was found just before 6 a.m. in the backyard of a house on Hanbury Street, and it was actually found by a man living on this street. Similar to Polly, her throat was sliced open. However, this time her whole uterus was missing. Again, he's gone in and like messed up with this body. Again, it's not a casual killing.
No. And this person, whoever it was, had some type of like interest in the body, like anatomy, which was actually kind of common for back then. Like, people didn't know that much about medicine and the human body, so people would straight up like dig up graves just to like check out bodies and like look at them. So this kind of thing was, I mean, people started thinking maybe it was just someone who's just interested in uteruses, like they wanted to take one home to experiment on it or something. But whoever this person was, like took it out with like surgical precision in the middle of the street in the middle of the that night.
It was very good. It was someone that had done things like this before, someone with experience. So like we said, her body was found in the back garden of a house, and this house actually housed 16 people. And the fact that none of these 16 people heard anything, saw anything, the door was unlocked as well, because there's that many people living there, they need like constant access in and out, and no one heard or saw anything. But the fact that the door was unlocked means it could have been anyone, not even anyone that lived in the house.
And I mean, whoever this was going very quick if they did that without and removed a uterus without anyone seeing at a house of 16 people. Makes no sense. So Annie Chapman was buried on September 14th, and the crazy thing is her grave no longer exists because it's been buried over, which is like a thing that happens here. I didn't even know that. I was at a really old Scottish cemetery and there were like graves that had been like doubled up.
I've never heard of that before.
Yep, you run out of room, start burying people on top of each other. Yeah, they're doing that in a lot of countries. I'm pretty sure they do that in America too.
So there was only one kind of noteworthy thing found at the scene of her death, and that was a leather apron. Now that actually ties into a suspect that we're going to talk about in the second half of this video called Leather Apron. But yeah, I'm not going to say much more about that.
So one of the interesting things about this case is that there were so many letters written to the police, and I mean so many, and it's believed that most of them, if not like almost all of them, are fake by people that are just posing as Jack the Ripper, but some of them definitely could have been real. So one of them is the Dear Boss letter, which I'll read real fast. It says, "Dear Boss, I keep hearing that the police have caught me, but they won't fix me just yet. I have laughed when they look so clever and talk about being on the right track. The joke about the leather apron gave me the real fits. I am down on whores and shan't quit ripping them till I do get buckled. Grand work the last job was. I gave the lady no time to squeal. How can they catch me now? I love my work and I want to start again. You will soon hear of me with my funny little games. I saved some of the proper red stuff in a ginger beer bottle over the last job to write with, but it went thick like glue and I can't use it. Red ink is fit enough, I hope." So I think he was trying to use blood as ink and it turned too thick. He actually wrote "ha ha" in this, like he's from 2019, which is weird. But he also writes, "The next job I do shall clip the lady's ears off and send to the police officers just for jolly, wouldn't you? Keep this letter back till I do a bit more work, then give it out straight. My knife's so nice and sharp, I want to get to work right away if I get a chance. Good luck. Yours truly, Jack the Ripper." So yes, that is why Jack the Ripper is called Jack the Ripper. He actually made the name for himself, which I think a lot of people just think it's like kind of a name, because most serial killers like someone else names them, but no, Jack the Ripper named himself that. He had a real way with words. That letter came in on September 27th to the Central News Agency. So that letter was eventually released to the public, but a lot of the people in the public just thought it was like a journalist or someone, so they've never confirmed really any of the letters to be him. Like, you don't really know. But yeah, that is the famous Dear Boss letter.
And then 3 days later, on September 30th at around 1 a.m, the body of Elizabeth Stride was found by a man named Louis. Elizabeth was born in Sweden on November 27th, 1843. She became a prostitute, and by March of 1865, she was registered by the Gothenburg police as a prostitute. So she was known to police, but that obviously didn't stop women because they were so desperate.
Yeah.
In 1869, Elizabeth married a man named John Stride, and the two of them had 9 children together while they were together, although 2 of these died tragically drowning in the River Thames. At least that was the story that Elizabeth told friends, but that wasn't actually true. In fact, her husband died of tuberculosis 5 years before her children supposedly drowned, but she actually had no children either.
Imagine making up 9 children that you don't have.
And that 2 of them died tragically.
Yeah, quite the storyteller.
After her separation from her husband, she got into an on and off relationship with a man named Michael while she was still working the streets. But this was kind of an abusive relationship. There were assault charges involved and everything, and just a couple of days before her murder, she actually broke things off with this guy completely.
So on the night before her murder, on September 29th, she was wearing a black jacket and a skirt, and she may have actually been seen with one of her clients, who is a short man with a dark mustache wearing a morning suit and a bowler hat. And then she was also seen again at around 11:45 p.m. with a man wearing a peaked cap. I feel like these are probably not right. All these people claim to see her with all these different men and all these different men in different hats. But it doesn't, like, it's kind of hard to say if they were even really actually seeing her, like, and who she could have actually been with at the end of, at the last person, because she was probably with a bunch of men during the night, right?
And to be fair, it might just be people hearing about this case and being like, I want to be involved. I saw Elizabeth with this guy. When they might not have even seen her.
But at 12:35 a.m., she was seen with a man wearing a hard felt hat. Now, what's interesting is the man was carrying a package around 18 inches in length, because that's the weird thing about the Jack the Ripper case, is he was known for carrying around this like big knife, but wouldn't you like see it? Whoever this was claimed to have this huge like fancy knife. Like, it's kind of hard to like hide that. It's not like he would have like a purse or something. So that's kind of interesting how to know and see this big knife.
A witness did report seeing Elizabeth Long on the night of her murder around 12:45 a.m. being attacked and thrown to the ground by a man. And when her body was found, it was determined that she had also only been dead for around 30 minutes before she was found. So this killer is hiding in plain sight most of the time.
Yeah, like it seemed like people were just coming across the bodies like right after it happened, very fresh. And she was found on Burmer Street. So what's interesting about her body and how it was found in comparison to the other two is she did have her throat cut, but she didn't have anything else. So police think that maybe he was kind of cut short on what he was doing, like someone came up to him, or, you know, he felt like someone was going to find him or catch him in the act, so he stopped doing whatever else he had planned to do.
Because it was unlike the Ripper to just leave it at that. Like, he was disemboweling these people. Like,
he had that medical interest, so it seemed like he didn't get to finish the job.
And what's interesting is when her body was found, she was still holding a packet of breath mints in her hand, and that suggests that maybe she didn't know that she was going to be attacked. She hadn't thrown these mints to the floor to defend herself or anything. So
it was like super sudden and quick.
So obviously this guy went and told police all about this man that he'd seen Elizabeth with that night. He said that he was between the ages of 25 and 30, slightly taller than her, and wearing a soft felt hat, which does align up with one of the men that Elizabeth was seen with that night in a felt hat.
It seemed like it was just like everyone had hats on like all the time back then.
They were all acting really classy.
It was just like, which type of hat was the person wearing? Elizabeth Stride was buried on Saturday, October 6th of 1888 in East London Cemetery. So the next victim was named Catherine, and she was found less than an hour after Elizabeth was found. So this all happened in like a few hours.
Yeah.
Crazy.
So while police were at the site of Elizabeth Long's murder, Jack the Ripper was out killing Catherine Eddowes.
Yeah, and hers might be the most brutal one. Okay, so on September 29th, she was found like laying drunk in the street, and police took her into custody so she could sober up, and they let her go at 1 a.m. Very strange. So she was sober enough to walk home at 1 a.m., and as she was walking home, she was last seen at 1:35. So she was literally killed and then found within 10 minutes. Like between 1:35 and 1:45, someone had already found her dead.
And again, this wasn't just a quick killing.
No.
They had messed with Catherine's body, whoever had done this.
And you almost wonder if they were kind of upset that they didn't get to finish the last person, that they went and like took it out majorly on Catherine, because hers was, like you said, just the most brutal. Like her uterus was missing, but also her kidney.
So close by to Catherine's body, police actually found a piece of her apron in a doorway of a random shop. I don't think she had any connection to this shop, so we can assume that that was the killer putting that there. So what's crazy about where this apron piece was found is that it was actually in the same direction as where Elizabeth's body was found. So Jack the Ripper killed Elizabeth, then went and killed Catherine, and then walked back in the direction of Elizabeth's body to dispose of this apron piece. So he walked willingly towards police who were looking at Elizabeth's body. So he was very cocky about this whole thing.
You almost wonder if it was someone that like could have just been really under the radar. Like we will talk about the idea of it possibly being a woman. Like a woman would have been able to just walk right by
Just
and
slip
no one
by
would have
police.
said anything. Catherine was buried on Monday, October 8th in the City of London Cemetery in an unmarked grave, which is really sad. In late 1996, the cemetery authorities actually decided to mark her grave with a plaque. On October 1st, there was actually another letter sent to the Central News agency, and this time it was a postcard, and it was written by someone who claimed to be the Ripper and in a person's handwriting that was very similar to the first letter that they received from someone also claiming to be them. And the postcard said, "I was not codding, dear old boss. When I gave you the tip, you'll hear about Saucy Jackie's work tomorrow. Double event this time. Number 1, swilled a bit, couldn't finish straight off, had not the time to get ears for the police." So I guess they're saying that they ran out of time, they were rushed, and they weren't able to cut an ear off because they said previously they were going to cut an ear off and send it in. "Thanks for keeping the last letter back till I got to work again. Jack the Ripper." So we're not exactly sure when the police actually got this postcard, but they think that it was actually the next morning, like right after the murders, just because of the way that it's worded.
And if it was sent the day after the murders, then that proves that this probably is from Jack the Ripper, because the details of the 2 double murders the night before weren't out in the media yet. Those are things that only the killer would know.
Yeah, so then, yeah, that's a really good point. That definitely makes the letters a lot more believable. Then on October 16th, a man named George Lusk received a letter. George was the head of the Mile End Vigilance Committee, which was an organization for local businessmen to assist the police. The letter was delivered in a box that had a half of a human kidney in it, and the letter was signed "From Hell." And this is definitely one of the most famous Jack the Ripper letters, although a lot of people don't think that it's a real Jack the Ripper letter. I don't know how else they would have gotten a kidney.
No, you just find them.
Yeah. You don't just find them. He just picked one up on his way. But the weird thing is that they thought that the kidney was Catherine's kidney, obviously, but when they did testing on it, it actually wasn't even her other kidney. So after some investigation, they actually did discover that this was just a prank from a medical student. So the last victim that we are going to talk about today is Mary Kelly, and her body was actually found on November 9th, and it was about a month after the double murder. Now the thing about Kelly is her origins are pretty unknown and undocumented. We really have no idea what her life was like before this. According to someone that she knew, she said that she had 7 different siblings and came to England when she was really, really young, but we don't really know much about her other than that.
In 1884, Kelly moved to Whitechapel in London and she found work in a brothel. She did also become an alcoholic during this time. I heard that she really liked gin in particular.
Oh, really?
Her old roommate said that she was a fan of gin. So on the night of November 9th, when Mary Kelly died, did you just see that?
Yeah, I definitely saw that. Was that a bird?
I think someone might have dropped something off a balcony. That was way too fast to be a bird. Oh my god.
That was creepy. I hope that wasn't a person. That was way too small.
No, we're too small to be a person. On the night of her murder, Mary's neighbour reported seeing her stumbling home very drunk in the company of a red-haired man wearing a bowler hat. And this was around 11:45 p.m.
Again with the hat. Clearly Jack Ripper wore hats.
Yeah, it seemed
I think
everyone
we can
did.
agree on that. Seems like that's the only thing that is consistent with all these witness testimonies. We'll talk about it a bit more, but they are all really different. What people said is his age, his skin, his hair, his facial hair. It was constantly changed. Hair color. Yeah, this person saying he's a redhead. But one thing that stays consistent is he's normally described as wearing a hat.
Any hat.
Yeah, a hat of some sort.
So Mary and her neighbour said goodnight to each other and they both went into their homes. And Mary's was just above this neighbour, and so the neighbour heard pretty much everything. They heard her singing until 1:30 a.m. and then assumed that she went to bed at that point because that's when the singing stopped.
This is her must just be a video
No,
of
it's
it.
sung by Karen.
Oh, I was that's really creepy. So the next morning, the landlord's assistant actually went to Mary's apartment to collect rent from her, and no one was answering the door. He was knocking on the door, and eventually he, I guess, reached in through her window and somehow opened the door, I'm guessing, and that's when he found her body mutilated on her bed. So this was different because most people were found outside. She was found in her bed.
But one of the interesting things is that there was no signs of forced entry in this house, and it seemed that she was killed in her sleep because her clothes were folded neatly at the end of her bed. She was wearing her nightgown. She was laid normally in bed. So this was very different for the Ripper.
Yeah, literally coming in while someone's asleep.
And it seemed as though the other ones were kind of while they were on the job, street workers. Whereas this one is completely different.
Completely different. So then around 2 a.m., this guy named George Hutchinson says that he had an interaction with her where she asked him for money. And he basically said, I can't give you any, I'm broke. And then he saw her go off with another guy who looked to be Jewish. Now what's weird is he gave the police like an extremely detailed description of this guy's appearance. And it was dark out, which is strange. And it was down to his eyelash color. What? He claimed that he saw Mary talking in the street to this man, that she complained about losing her handkerchief, and that he gave her one that he had and it happened to be red. But around 2:30 a.m., another woman said that she saw Kelly outside of her apartment with some man that looked like she knew him. Like the way that they were interacting makes her feel like it was someone that she actually did know. So it could have actually been George. So a lot of people are, you know, suspicious about George because his description was so like detailed down to someone's eyelash color that it's a little odd.
It's not something you remember about a person, the color of their eyelashes. It's not even something you see about a person when it's dark.
Definitely not.
Everyone's eyelashes look black in the dark.
Like unless you're blonde. Yeah, and in the dark you wouldn't be able to see that at all.
No.
So a lot of people today think that this guy really could have completely made this up just for attention, or he really is Jack the Ripper and made up this other dude to basically throw the police off of his scent.
So Mary's body was found, much like Polly's body, disemboweled. So again, with the whole opening people up, taking bits out.
Terrible condition.
But this time, she was also found practically skinned, which is the first time he'd ever done that.
Yeah, and I believe I was reading at the museum, I don't know if it was this victim or the previous one of the ones he disemboweled, he straight up took their like organs out and put them over their shoulder. Like hung it over their shoulder. I know, really gross. I was reading that in the museum, I was like, oh my god. Now, the really sad thing about Mary Kelly is no family came to her funeral, which is just really, really awful. So those are the 5 main victims that are considered to be the victims of Jack the Ripper. So now we are going to hop into a different video on Eleanor's channel to go over the theories, because there's quite a few and we both kind of have our different thoughts. Yeah, it's really interesting because it could be any of them, but also may not be any of them. Like we may not have a single idea. So check the link, there'll be a link below to the next part 2. Make sure to subscribe to Eleanor. She does true crime videos too and covers a lot of cases, you know, outside of the United States. I tend to focus on those. She tends to focus on ones here in the UK.
Yeah, mainly UK cases.
Yeah. But that's it for me today, guys. I hope you enjoyed part 1. Make sure to check out part 2 and I will see you next time.